For this topic, we will discuss about business fascination with utilitarianism. Utilitarianism holds that the most ethical choice is the one that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number. As such, it is the only moral framework that can justify military force or war. Moreover, utilitarianism is the most common approach to the business ethics because of the way that it accounts for cost and benefits. In business fascination and utilitarianism, we have a theory. The theory asserts that there are two types of utilitarian ethics practiced in the business world. The two types of theory is the rule utilitarianism and act of utilitarianism. The first one is rule utilitarianism. Helps the largest number of people using the fairest method possible. And the second one is the act utilitarianism. It makes the most ethical action possible for the benefit of the people.
What is utilitarianism? Utilitarianism is a theory of morality that advocates actions that foster happiness or pleasure and oppose actions that cause unhappiness or harm. When directed toward making social, economic, or political decisions, a utilitarian philosophy will aim for the betterment of society as a whole. The core of idea of utilitarian is that we ought to act to improve the well-being of everyone by as such as possible. Utilitarian theories generally shape four elements: the consequentialism, the welfarism, the impartiality, and additive aggressionism. Utilitarian is the family of ethical theories on which the rightness of actions or policies depends on and only on the sum total of well-being they produce. Sometimes philosophers talk about welfare or utility rather than well-being, but they typically means the same thing. What is consequentialism? Consequentialism is the view that moral rightness of actions, rules, policies depends on and only on the value of their consequences. To evaluate whether an action is right or wrong, we should look at all its consequences rather than any of its other features. For instance, when breaking a promise has bad consequences, consequentialists consider it wrong to do so. However, breaking a promise is not considered wrong in and of itself. In exceptional cases, breaking a promise would be morally permissible or even required, such as when doing so is necessary to save life. For example, imagine a runway train was hurtling down on a track, and on the track ahead there's 5 people who are about to struck and killed by the train. Unfortunately, there's a fork in the track ahead, and you happen to be standing right next to the rail switch. If you flip the switch, the train will be diverted to the track and 5 people will be saved. But there's a catch. Another person is on the track, so by diverting the train and save the 5 people, you will be killing an innocent person. This is a tough question, but most people say that the right thing to do is to pull the lever. Why? Because it has the best consequences. It's better than the 5 live and 1 dies rather than 1 live and 5 dies. So this case seems to support consequentialism. It seems okay to kill an innocent person if doing so would have a good enough outcome.
Next, we will go to applying utilitarianism in business fascination. We have the 4 elements. The first one is consequentialism. Consequentialism is the view that moral rightness of action, rules, or policies is depend on and only on the value of their consequences. Sequentialism rivals are views on which actions can be inherently right or wrong regardless of their consequences. For example, according to deontology, morality is about following a system of rules like do not lie or do not steal. And according to the virtue ethics, morality is fundamentally about having a virtuous character. Another example in a business term, a business may manufacture and sell substandard and unsafe products in their quest for more, even though it is contradicting the moral and ethical system, because for them it is benefits their organization and can make more profit. Also, we have the direct and indirect consequentialism, explaining the difference between act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. The common distinction in the philosophical literature is between two views called direct consequentialism and indirect consequentialism.
There's two types of consequentialism, the direct consequentialism and indirect consequentialism. Direct consequentialism is whether an act is morally right depends only on the consequences of the act itself, as opposed to the consequences of the agent motive of a rule or practice that covers other acts at the same kind, and so on. According to the direct view, the rightness of an action's rules and policies depends only on its consequences. On this view, to determine the right actions in some set of feasible actions, we should directly evaluate the consequences of the actions to see which has the best consequences. The best known of direct view is an act of utilitarianism or an act of consequentialism, which directly assess the moral rightness of actions. For example, he justified the rules consequentialism because it impartially justified intuitively possible moral rules. Therefore, it is not a truly consequentialist theory. Though an act of utilitarianism access only actions rather than rules, it never also recognized the importance of having strong commitments to familiar moral rules. Rules such as don't lie and don't kill are regarded of use decisions procedures guidelines, so we could almost follow but not a standard of moral rightness.
Direct consequentialism, we should evaluate the moral status of an action, rule, policies indirectly based on its relationship to something else, such as rule, whose status is itself assessed in terms of its consequences. According to the rule utilitarianism, what makes an action right is that it conforms to the set of rules that would have the best utilitarian consequences if they were generally accepted or followed. Since an action morality depends only on its conformity to a rule rather than its own consequences, rule utilitarianism is a form of indirect consequentialism. Rule utilitarianism is a form of indirect consequentialism. Rule utilitarianism is a form of indirect consequentialism.
Welfareism. According to Eaglestone, welfareism is the understanding that the wrongness or the rightness of the operation depends on society's conceptions of welfare or well-being. This aspect of utilitarianism suggests that actions are good for the greatest well-being of the societies or many people.
It is the view that only the welfare of individuals determines how good a particular state of the world is. The wrongness of right or rightness of operation depends on society's conception of welfare or well-being. This aspect of utilitarianism that actions are good for the greatest well-being of the society or many people. Therefore, From a welfarist perspective, good consequences are those which increases well-being in the world, while bad consequences are those which decrease. Philosophers use the term well-being to describe everything that is good for a person and itself, as opposed to things only instrumentally good for a person. For example, money can buy useful things and is less good for a person instrumentally, but it is not a component of well-being. Example, in business, the management may decide to increase the wages and benefits of their employees if it improves the well-being or promotes the happiness of their employees. In this regard, the business will be positively applying utilitarianism when they can balance the principle of pleasure and pain and how they can influence their performance.
What is individualism? So, individualism is the moral stance, political philosophy, ideology, or social outlook that emphasizes the moral worth of the individual. As an affinity to a basic economic understanding of existence, involves the right of an individual to freedom and self-realization. So in other words, it is the principle of being independent. Yung kung paano mo intindihin ang sitwasyon sa buhay, mga pananaw mo, like that. Example of an individualism. So when the government allows citizens to be responsible for their own retirement instead of relying on social security. Or yung gusto lang naman iparating ng individualism na instead of relying to others, you mostly rely to your ideas, to your mga pinaniwalaan sa buhay.
Importance of individualism. The freedom to do what we want as independent people. People are constantly bombarded into doing things that people in authority want them to do. It's important because if everyone is able to pursue their own goals, then we would have a stronger society as a whole. May kalayaan tayo na gawin yung isang bagay na hindi tayo nakadepende sa ibang tao. Importante ang individualism kasi nga sabi kung magagawa ng mga tao ang mga bagay na gustong marating, mas magiging maunlad pa ang ating lipunan. Kasi diba kung lahat ng tao independent, hindi na natin kailangan umasa pa sa tulong mula sa gobyerno. Kaya natin gawin ang mga bagay na gusto natin as own. Argues that you should make decision based on what ethically motivate you as an individual. Tuwing gumagawa tayo ng isang desisyon, isang bagay, binabasa natin ito sa kung ano talaga yung gusto natin. Every person in an organization is morally responsible for his or her own behavior, and any effort to change that behavior should focus on an individual. May responsibilidad tayo sa mga bagay na ginagawa natin na nakadepende pa rin sa kung ano yung gusto natin. Advantage of individualism. It prioritizes creative expression, prizes the individual, and allows for greater progress. Inuuna nito at binibigyan ng pagkakataon na maipahayag ang gusto ng isang tao. Individualism promotes is significantly associated with support for gender equal attitude regarding employment, income, education, and political leadership. Also associated with greater level of female employment and educational attainment and lower levels of fertility. Mabibigyan nito ng pantay na karapatan na gawin ng mga babae at lalaki ang gusto nilang gawin at nagbibigay ito ng mataas na confidence sa sarili. Individualism means in history is all about taking care of yourself. It is the belief and practice that every person is unique and self-reliant. The concept of individualism is rooted in historical context where people's personal differences were dismissed, even punished by ruling body. Ang individualism ay ang pag-intindi lamang sa sarili at pagsunod sa kung ano yung gusto niya. Ang mga tao ay kakaiba at may natatanging confidence sa sarili. Ang tao daw ay nagkakaiba-iba base daw sa kung paano tayo kumilos. Example of individualism. When you support yourself financially and do not depend on anyone else for your needs. Halimbawa ako as individual, may gusto ako na bagay, and then gagawa ako ng way para mabakal ko yadto na dili ako nag-aasa sa family ko or sa kanino man.
Aggregationism. According to utilitarianism, the overall value in the world is given by the sum total of well-being in it. This means that utilitarians accept aggregationism. Aggregationism is the view that the value of the world is the sum of the value of its parts, where these parts are local phenomena such as experiences, lives, or societies. This view implies that we can meaningfully compare and trade off that well-being of individuals and group of individuals by adding up their well-being. For example, utilitarianism claims that improving 5 lives by some amount is better than improving 1 life by the same amount, and that is 5 times better. Some philosophers deny any forms of aggregationism. They may believe, for instance, that small benefits delivered to many people cannot outweigh large benefit to a few people. To illustrate this belief, suppose you face the choice between saving a given person's life or preventing a large group of people from experiencing mild headaches. An anti-aggregationist might hold that saving the life is more morally important than preventing the headaches. Regardless of the number of headaches prevented, utilitarians would reason that if there are enough people whose headaches you can prevent, then the total well-being generated by preventing the headaches is greater than the total well-being of saving life. So you are morally required to prevent the headaches. The number of headaches we have to relieve for it to be better than saving a life might be, in practice, extremely high, but utilitarians nonetheless believe there is some number of headaches at which this trade-off should be made. In practice, many individuals and policymakers appear to endorse this kind of trade-offs. For example, allowing cars to drive fast on roads increases the number of people who die in accidents. Placing exceedingly low speed limits would save lives at the cost of inconveniencing many drivers. Most people demonstrate an implicit commitment to aggregationism when they judge it to worth impose this many inconveniences for the sake of saving a few lives. When we accept aggregationism, we need to choose how to aggregate the well-being of individuals. There are other theories of aggregationism beyond additive aggregation. Prioritarianism resembles utilitarianism, but differs because it regards benefits to the worse off as more important than benefits to the better off. Prioritarianism does not simply add up benefits, but instead discounts the benefits to those who are already well off. Yet another aggregationist view is egalitarianism, which hold that the goodness of an outcome depends not only on the sum total of well-being, but also on how equally this well-being is distributed across all people.